Good morning, Woodland. We're so delighted that you've joined us for this summer series called Calling. I think it's going to be a delightful month. When we use the term calling, it sounds a bit churchy, doesn't it? Has an ecclesiastical kind of ring to it. But I don't think that's so. I think everyone has a calling, and we need to identify it as such. Eric Little in Chariots of Fire had this great quote. He said, I believe God made me for a purpose. He made me to run fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. Well, this summer, I think we want to talk about the pleasure that God has in each of us as we pursue our callings. Today, we get to enjoy Cameron and Garrett Vickery as they talk about their respective callings in and out of the church. And I think you're going to enjoy them, and I think you're going to benefit from hearing about them. But because so many of you have joined the church just in recent years, I thought that you may not have all their histories and have all their personality inventories together yet. So I'm just going to let them talk a little bit about their lives, and then we'll get how that kind of funnels into a sense of calling. Uh, Tell us a little bit about your growing up years and the influence of your family. Each one of you talk about it because they're very similar in some ways, but very unique in others.
So I grew up in Dallas. So did Garrett. So you'll see we have some similarities, like Mike said. Let's see, I was the oldest. I am the oldest of three children. My dad was a pastor, and my mom was a dental hygienist. Um, Absolutely her calling. And
Yeah, we're not joking about that. That is
yeah,
seriously.
So why do you say that?
She's a cleaner.
she's a cleaner. That's like, as soon as you know her, you know she likes things clean. And
Uh-huh.
so she loves that vocation of taking a project and making it shine and sparkle. So yes, a pastor, a dental hygienist, oldest of three children, grew up in Dallas. Interestingly, my dad was a Baptist pastor and had the unusual experience of being at the same church for over 30 years. And so we went there when I started, the summer before I started kindergarten is when we moved to
Yeah.
Dallas. And so I was able to stay in the same, school system, the same church all through my growing up years, which is unusual for a pastor's kid. So I was very fortunate to have that experience and was very shaped by the church that I was raised in. A very generous community who actually had a lot of focus on identifying the call of God on young people's lives. That was part of the language of the church. And I think my dad had a large part to play in that, but it was not only him. That was something that the church really cared about. And so this idea of calling has been certainly a part of my identity and my growing up since I was young.
And as Cameron said, I also grew up in Dallas, and my dad was also a pastor. He was the pastor at Royal Lane Baptist Church for 27 years. So he went there when I was about 6 months old, and then he retired um, right after I graduated from divinity school.
Did you have any experiences at Wake or even Furman or Baylor that you could say that helped clarify my sense of calling, that I am where I'm supposed to be? And I don't know, you don't even have to know what's going to happen ultimately, but you can sense something's in this for me, and I'm not exactly sure. Does that make sense?
I have a little story from my divinity school days. It was my second year, and I was taking theology, just intro or systematic theology. And I was not looking forward to that class. It just didn't sound interesting to me. I really liked Greek and I liked, New Testament, but I wasn't really excited about theology. But I had a moment where I'm reading Jürgen Moltmann's Trinity in the Kingdom, and I became so emotional and overwhelmed by sort of a light bulb epiphany moment while reading. and kind of stayed up all night and just devoured it, and showed up at my theology professor, Frank Tupper, showed up at his office the next morning, and I just had not gotten any sleep. And I just said, I have to talk to you about this. And I just spilled my thoughts and probably cried. And he said, welcome to theology. He said, now I know you are a true theologian. You know what you're doing. It was just very much it was a formative experience for me. And then much later, I think I had shared about that with my dad, and he said, oh, well, I wrote my dissertation on that exact topic. And so it's just sort of a cool moment.
Yeah, I think for me it was one of the things that was I think really powerful about our divinity school experience was the way the student body shaped each other, and we challenged each other, and we supported each other. And so when I was there, me and my best friend Kevin Sinclair, who's been around Woodland some. He came to he led the church retreat a few years ago. But he and I both had really strong positive experiences of church growing up. Cameron did as well. But that's not the case for a lot of the people that are showing up in seminaries and divinity schools. A lot of people are showing up wounded by congregational life, and in fact looking, maybe to do something outside the church. So for us, we were, the three of us, I think, were kind of like evangelists for the church within seminary life, because so many of our peers, not all, but a significant portion had negative experiences.
Both of you have delightful senses of call. Both of you are called Reverend in one sense or the other. Reverend Mama and Reverend Woodland. Talk a little bit about Reverend Mama for me,
Okay.
Cameron, because I think this is really a remarkable thing that you're doing.
Well, thank you. Mike is referring to an Instagram account that I run along with my friend Victoria Robb Powers, who is a pastor. And she and I wrote a children's book together, which I'm sure I've told you about already. My Love, God is Everywhere. And so this plays into that. It plays into this conversation on call to me. We wrote this book simply because we noticed a lack of really good children's books about God that we could endorse and wanted to provide for our own kids. And so we decided to write one. And for me, that's just an example of the way I see my calling, is being open to the movement of the Spirit and to look around and find a need and say, what gifts do I have that I could use to respond to this in this moment? And so writing that book was really a way for me to use my gifts and express my calling. So we wrote this book, and our publisher really wanted us to help promote the book so that people would buy it. And so they asked us to create an Instagram page, but that in itself has become a really fun and life-giving ministry, so much more than, buy our book. And so we created it to be a resource for parents primarily, or anyone with children in their lives, to be able to get tools to talk about God with their kids, and spiritual discipline, spiritual practices with their kids, children's book recommendations, things like that, to kind of talk about really theology on it for children, so that they can be introduced to a spirituality and a theology that they don't have to recover from later. And that's sort of, I have found a lot of people in the social media space that are trying to do that right now. So this is, I think this is something that really excites me. And I think that there's a lot of energy around this in the faith community. So that's been good to see. The name Reverend Mamas we decided to use that so that people could see, could recognize that we are moms and we are ministers. The funny thing about it is that I am not ordained. And when Victoria and I were playing around with names, I said, I just don't know if we can use that because I'm not actually technically a reverend. And she's just extremely generous and is like, so what? You basically are. And I want to share that title with you in this way. And it's been kind of interesting, I'll be honest with you, to try on the title in this way, and to sort of see how it feels. And it has brought about with me a little bit of discernment about, do I want to really do this and get ordained? And so I'm still discerning my calling. It's certainly not a one-time thing.
Garrett, when did you discover that you were going to make the transition from youth ministry into the pastorate? And
Yeah, I mean,
nation, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I just think, I think youth ministers, when talking to colleagues or other people that are youth ministers, we always would complain about youth parents. And so that was like the worst part of the job, right? Is dealing with the youth parents, was the old stereotype.
And that's us now.
And that's us now. Yeah, exactly. We're the worst.
Sorry, Jana.
We are the worst. And so, but when I got to Myers Park and was serving there as the student minister, I really enjoyed relating to those parents, and to the whole congregation. And so I really started to sense, maybe this is something I need to look into, as not pigeonholing or ministering just to one aspect, one generation, but I think I might be open to something new.
Cameron, talk a little bit about your work with Fellowship Southwest and your journalism work with public schools and things like that. I mean, because that your ministry is evolving.
Mhm.
Calling is evolving.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I have never had a clear sense of, I want to be a senior pastor and preach every week the way he has. My calling is much more responsive to the needs of the moment and to my circumstance and what I can do. And so, yeah, that's how I became passionate about public education. Is, it was actually when the kids were really little, before they were in school, but becoming a parent and starting to look around and look at the state of our schools and the needs there, drew me into that conversation. And I've always loved the partnership between advocacy and church, or advocacy and ministry, is really interesting to me, because I think it's a good way for us to practice our faith and to have influence in the public sphere, and do it correctly. There's a lot of people that abuse that and in my humble opinion, don't do it right. But I do think it's important that people of faith have a voice, and particularly when they're advocating on behalf of others and not just for their own privilege. And that's a big distinction. And so I've always enjoyed opportunities to do that, and have done so through public education work. And then became involved with Fellowship Southwest. The way I became involved there is that they needed communications help, and I like to write and create content and things like that. And I've sort of grown in that position at this organization, and their primary issue is immigration. And I have learned so much. So I like to learn new things. I like, it fits my gifts to kind of always be doing something different.
Garrett, talk a little bit about your calling as it's also evolved. In fact, that one of the things I admire about you is that you become not, if not the center pole, but a very important pole for the tent of ecumenical work and of Baptist work in Texas. And you had to take on some positions that were difficult. How has that shaped your ministry, and how has it shaped your understanding of call?
I think when I first started in ministry, I had the sense that the Baptist world was perhaps larger than it is. And then when you kind of get into this work and you start looking around and you start realizing, boy, there are not as many people doing this as I thought there were. I mean, it's a little bit more of a smaller insular world than I expected, especially when it comes to cooperative Baptist fellowship. But even the wider tent there, I really came into to my sense of calling. I wanted to create. I usually say I heard once that you should create an elevator pitch for your ministry, and so I've tried to do that a little bit with seeking to. I feel called to create sacred communities of belonging that inspire hope in projects that inspire hope in Christ or something like that. And so
You gotta memorize that.
I really got to get that down. It's going to be an elevator that doesn't get stuck.
Yeah.
And so, but I really came into Woodland with the expectation that I needed to work on preaching, and that would be a long task. Like I came here at 30 and was very raw, didn't know what I was doing. Some of you remember those days. Some of you probably still think we're in those days. And but I needed to work on it, and I knew it was going to be a long, slow growth. And so I really wanted to spend my first decade working on that. I didn't come in here with a sense of I need to be the lead advocate amongst cooperative Baptists in Texas or anything like that, and that's not what my emphasis has been. At the same time, there has been a major lack of voices for justice in Texas, especially within among Baptists. And so, I've written some about immigration. I wrote more for the San Antonio Express News actually early on when I got here. I wrote several op-eds years ago, or like two, I don't know. But I haven't done that in a while. But
I took over.
you did, and you do a better job at it. But yeah, and then there was the last several years, of course, on LGBTQ inclusion has been a big topic amongst Texas Baptist in all denominations, but of course with Texas Baptists and then with us getting removed from the BGCT last year because of my views on that. Of course, that became that puts me and Woodland honestly in a different position where we're kind of seen as this safe space or a leader in being an inclusive place where the love of Christ is actually known and shared with all. And as we know, that's not the most popular opinion amongst Baptists.
Both of you now are parents of youth, and your youth parents, I guess, as you said earlier. How are you talking about calling with your girls? And how do you, for us, we wanted to talk about it, but we didn't want to make too big a deal about it, lest they thought we were pushing them into ministry, church ministry. But I wanted to push them into saying, this is a God thing. This isn't a church thing. How are you guys doing that?
Well, I think, as our kids have grown, they've gone through stages of wanting to do certain things. Our youngest right now is really interested in being a singer, a teacher, and a pastor.
All at once. She has a plan for how to do this.
There's a plan.
She's a singer on the weekends,
Mm-hmm.
a teacher during the week, and get this, a pastor in the summers. And so she wants she wants to offer to pastors that they can take a break in the summer and she'll be the pastor for the summer.
Mhm.
There's a niche there.
I know,
Right.
it's
Well,
brilliant.
it's also a beautiful expression of like her three loves coming together. Um, because she's had this wonderful experience with her church, and she loves music, and she's loved her teachers at school. And so,
Taylor Swift.
and
specifically.
yeah, Taylor Swift, I guess I should say, she loves music. She loves one artist. And, but I think that's a really wonderful expression of calling. And I think I think I'm rare, and I think we tend in Baptist and church life to focus so much on calling or vocation, in terms of like pastor or missionary. And it's so much more multifaceted than that. And I think that's why Cameron's expression of vocation and calling is so helpful, uh, because I think her experience and calling is so much more common. Like I'm called to things and I'm going to respond over time, because as we go through life, we grow and change, and we get new gifts come to the fore, and we're in different environments where we need to respond in different ways, and that's much more realistic to what call is. It's not as if we're all just one puzzle piece that God is going to put into a certain place. So it's much more fluid than that, and I think that's a good thing. And so for our daughters, we just want to encourage them to look for ways to respond, and I think that's kind of how we've talked to them about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, but I also want to say that parents can only say so much to their kids, because they're just less likely to listen to their parents, as we all know.
mm,
And so I've seen people at church at Woodland, some of you that have, identified things in our daughters that you think are really special and told them or told us. And I really appreciate that, because I think that sticks a little bit more than what their mom and dad would say. And so thank you for that, and please keep doing it and do it for all the children of Woodland.
yeah, and that's one of the things, like your dad does a good job of talking about that. And he has he calls it, the church's role is to notice, name, and nurture calling. And um, that could be for children, but that should be for all ages. We should be noticing the gifts around us, naming them, and then looking for how we can nurture the calling of all of our members.
We're going to transition now to a biblical story that you'll read and that folks will read in the classrooms. It's a story that's well known. It's the story of Samuel's call. But it's interesting, I think, especially in light of our conversation, because it happens in church uh, and with church people, and somebody telling him about God, maybe the original Godfather. So, hey, thank you so much, you guys. This was terrific.